accommodating Utah's massive growth with Utah Infrastructure for Roads, and all the legal work that needs to happen before that happens. Hello, I'm Richard Pine, and welcome to Legally Speaking. Joining me today is Mark Burns. He's the Division Director for our Highways and Utilities Division. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Hey, good morning. Glad to be here.
Do you think people realize the legality that's involved in paving, maintaining, and planning out roads?
I think there's a lot more involved than people appreciate. UDOT has a large operation that goes into acquiring property for public highways and maintaining them, which is quite a complex system.
So when we talk about creating a new road, for example, the roads out in the western part of Salt Lake County, Mountain View Corridor, Bangerter Highway, all those improvements out there, how much work is that legally to make sure that we can widen, we can create bridges to eliminate intersections that may cause problems, that kind of thing? Is there more to it than meets the eye, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. For a new highway, you're talking about acquiring thousands of miles, or at least hundreds of miles of property sometimes. You think about, for example, the Legacy Highway or the Southern Parkway in southern Utah. And UDOT does its best to try to avoid impacts on businesses and homes. So a lot of those new alignments try to go through what's either farmland or formerly vacant property, and UDOT will work directly with the property owners and acquire 95% of what they need through negotiation. My group is the group that's responsible for acquiring the other 5% through court activity, and that's called eminent domain.
Let me ask you a couple questions about eminent domain, because I find that to be pretty interesting. If you have someone that lives on a family farm out in Harriman, for example, and that family farm happens to be smack dab in the middle of a plan to create a 4-lane highway, what are the rights of the property owner? Can the state just swoop in and say, sorry, you're in the way, you got to get out of here? Or is it a little bit more complicated than that?
Well, in that situation, we would call that a total take or a total acquisition. And the property owner actually has certain entitlements, both under state and federal law, to relocate them to a new location that would be decent, safe, and sanitary. The state does a relocation study, determines whether there's properties that are of similar characteristics that the property owner can be relocated to. And if there's, let's just say that they are renting an apartment building and the whole apartment building has to be relocated, but rents are higher in other areas, then there are procedures that allow that displaced person to get a supplemental payment for the higher rent in the new location. And as far as your example of a family farm, the state has a responsibility to appraise the property, give the property owner the opportunity to be with the appraiser when they're determining what the value of the property is, and the owner has a right to get a second appraisal for free from the state through the private property ombudsman. And that process is very successful in terms of reaching a solution that both parties find acceptable. UDOT will settle 95% of those cases, and my group gets that 5% of cases that can't be resolved through negotiation.
If the family farm owner has their own lawyer, can that slow the process down? Do they come back with some kind of lawsuit, cease and desist, any kind of chance to intervene in the project?
So normally what happens is none of these cases are a surprise for the property owner. There's usually extensive period of public comment. The property owners know when there's going to be a project that's going to affect their property. And during this period of negotiation, UDOT will let them know that they have the opportunity to go to mediation to try to work it out informally before any litigation is filed. And if those efforts are unsuccessful, then the state would initiate the court case and name the property owner and anybody else that claims an interest in the property.
Well, we talk about the growth in northern Utah, but there's a massive growth in southern Utah too. Is this especially an issue in Washington County, the St. George area, Cedar City, as the area continues to boom?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, our day-to-day work really just follows wherever UDOT's big projects are. So when they were reconstructing I-15 in preparation for the 2002 Olympics, most of our work was here in the Salt Lake area. Now all the growth is in southern Utah and the western part of Salt Lake County and kind of the southern portion of Mountain View Corridor. And then then going north to Davis County and even farther. So our lawyers are appearing in courts all around the state. At the moment, Southern Utah is quite busy with highway construction and acquisition. The Southern Parkway that wraps around Sand Hollow Reservoir down near the St. George Airport was a major new highway to get people from the St. George area to Zion National Park and areas surrounding. It's a big project, and we have a couple court cases there involving thousands of acres of property, mostly vacant farm property right now.
Okay, so but the people are contesting the eminent domain?
Yes, that's right.
So there's cases there's cases happening right now.
That's right.
How do we prepare for those? Like, what are the state's rights compared to the property owner's rights? Is it usually over the value of the property, or is it the fact that it's happening at all?
So both can happen in any given case. The property owner can challenge whether the project is necessary for public use. Generally speaking, those challenges are unsuccessful because of the extensive planning that goes into place in selecting a location for a highway, especially with environmental work and environmental studies that require you look at alternatives. So the property owner can challenge for necessity, but generally speaking, the dispute is over what the state's going to be paying for the property, and the state will offer the appraised amount. Let's just say that the property being acquired is worth, in true dollars, $1 million. In the state's appraisal, let's say the state's appraisal is $1 million, then property owner can say, accept that, or I think that's low. And more often than not, a property owner believes their property's worth more than what the state's offering them, either due to lack of knowledge or maybe just lack of trust of government. And our system basically allows that property owner to, at the beginning of a condemnation case, receive that $1 million before the litigation gets underway under state law, and then they can prove to a fact finder, a judge, or jury that their property is worth more. And that's generally the type of work that we do. And it wouldn't be unusual if the state appraised property at $1 million that the property owner would claim it's worth $3 million. And juries sometimes will find a place in the middle, and that's our process. I like to say that we're just trying to make sure that we pay the property owner every penny that they're entitled to. And if our value is lower than what they're entitled to, then our job is to make sure that they get paid full compensation.
It's kind of interesting because I was driving along I-80 not too long ago, and I noticed some of the side streets and some of the streets that were running underneath the highway. I was going across a bridge, and I thought, there used to be a neighborhood in this area of I-80. I wonder what it looked like. So this process has gone on for a while, this eminent domain procedure. Has it changed over the years? Is it easier for the state now? Or how do we go about making changes is there a way to make it easier on the state or to defend the property owner's rights more? Or has that changed,
It's a really good question. I think if anything, the legislature and even the Supreme Court, both state and federal, have increased protections for property owners to make sure that they aren't surprised that there's going to be a court case that's filed. There's a requirement to give written notice in a particular form to a property owner before property is condemned. There's this process I mentioned earlier about getting a second appraisal from the private property ombudsman with using an appraiser of their choosing. So it's definitely changed over the years. We haven't had very many highway projects that were, I would say, is politically challenging as they have been in the past. If you think about, for example, Interstate 215 that wraps around the Salt Lake County area, where a huge portion of that went up through the East Bench area up toward the Cottonwood Canyons. And there were, I understand this is before my time, but there were a lot of homes in that area prior. We haven't had a highway project like that kind of went through the middle. I think probably the closest would be maybe some of the widening recently of I-15 in Midvale. There were some homes along that. Also, Bangor Highway had some homes along there. But generally speaking, something like a big one like, say, Mountain View Corridor is going to be going mostly through farmland or vacant land, and that's by design. They're trying to minimize the impact to the community and still serve the public interest and transportation.
I kind of noticed in Utah, my perception is, and we can probably debate this, but my perception is that the transportation infrastructure going north and south in general in the state is really solid and moves really well. But transportation infrastructure going east and west seems to have a little bit of a problem.
It's definitely
90th South, for example, becomes becomes kind of a nightmare. I don't really see any way of fixing that without tearing down somebody's property. Tearing out somebody's property. Is that part of the problem there?
It's a good example would be 3500 South, for example. If you drive down that road going westbound, you'll see there's not a lot of grass, not a lot of frontage or park strip anymore because that road's been widened so many times. And some of that's a function of local government planning and where they're promoting growth, trying to meet the needs of basically where the valley's growing. And our valley has grown a lot more on the west side, and people need to make those routes. My daughter had soccer in a soccer club in Harriman, and so I was one of the coaches, and transporting my girl back and forth, I realized it's a lot harder to get east-west in the valley, and UDOT's been working on that. An example of a project to serve that need would be Pioneer Crossing north of Utah Lake was a major east-west connector, and I'd say 114 South was another one where they were trying to improve the east-west connections. It's been definitely something that UDOT has been trying to pay attention to and improve.
So another north-south corridor, as long as we're kind of on that topic, going down to St. George. I've noticed that it used to seem like you could just fly through there and there wasn't that much traffic. Now there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of trucks. You can't just set your cruise control and space out. You got to pay attention, even if you're feeling like you're in the middle of nowhere, so to speak.
Yeah.
In order to widen I-15 in those more rural areas, would that be a relatively simple project? It would just be a matter of paying for it? Or would that require a complex network of eminent domain work and engineering work as well?
I think that there's quite a bit of geographic complexity as you go south. It's not just all flat. I mean, you definitely have some elevation changes in some areas, but it really, although the state has the power of eminent domain, widening I-15 is going to have its challenges both geographically and with some of the amount of property that would have to be acquired. The governor recently proposed a statewide trail network and indicated that he didn't have any desire to use eminent domain to make those connections. I'm interested, as a cyclist, I'm interested in seeing something like that happen, but I also realize that there's some property owners who just won't want to voluntarily sell. So I have in my mind this kind of zigzaggy path from the north part of the state to the south part of the state that actually might be pretty interesting to ride on your bike, but it's not going to be a direct route.
There's a lot that people don't realize about this. How would you grade Utah's transportation infrastructure when it comes to other states?
Well, my most recent experience is driving north to Boise. My son lived there for a little while, and the difference when you cross the state line on both the road construction and the maintenance, but even some of the design of the highways is so different. It's just, you can see that Utah has put a lot of investment in its infrastructure, and as compared to our neighboring states, it's just much more modern. I don't like to make comparisons of better or not, but you don't see the cloverleaf style interchanges here anymore. We have different interchanges that are designed to take a little more capacity, and you still see a lot of those older designs in Wyoming and Idaho, and Colorado's a little more updated. But anyway, we're definitely proud of the system that UDOT has created, and a lot of it they've done with lawyer assistance, but for the most part, this is UDOT just planning good projects and implementing good projects.
Well, before the concrete or the asphalt gets laid down, the legal groundwork must be made.
That's right.
Mark Burns, thanks for joining us, the Division Director for Highways and Utilities. I'm Richard Pyatt for Legally Speaking. We'll talk to you next time.